Greetings YouTube, Bram55 here, and today I'm coming back with a new episode of what I'm calling my Sailing Saturday series. I'm going to try to get an episode out of Virtual Skipper 5 every Saturday if I can. So today we're doing our second round of the round robin series in the Offshore Ocean Racing Cup. And welcome aboard. Let's hit the water and do some racing. So here's the standings after our first round. Let's see who our next opponent is. It'll be Great Britain versus Switzerland. And I went and ranked all the boats based on the number of sails they have up here. And there's a total of 4 rows of 5 for a total of 20. You can see Switzerland is lacking 2 sails, 1 in hull and 1 in spinnaker, whereas Great Britain is lacking 4 sails, 2 in spinnaker, 1 in sails, 1 in crew. So Switzerland's in the top 4 boats. Great Britain is basically ranked about 8th overall, so that should give me a pretty good challenge in the race. But let's get started. We're at the offshore site L3. The weather is sunny. The wind is southwest force 5. The wind is shifty, and it's a flood tide. So here we are. We're going to go ahead and get our jib up. And again, we want to maneuver against this boat over here, which is Switzerland. So let's get some information called up here. We're just going to go back and forth until the countdown timer in the bottom left, the clock, gets down to 4 minutes. Once we get to 4 minutes, we're allowed to cross the start-finish line to get on the start side of the course. That'll happen in about 30 seconds. And I've never seen this in reality, but apparently you can't even go in front of the committee boat until it gets down to 4 minutes. Once it gets to 4 minutes, there'll be a cannon fire. The P signal will go up. And there's the cannon, there's the P signal. And now we're allowed to cross the start-finish line. We have to get across that line once again between this committee boat to the left and this buoy off to the far end of the course before the countdown timer gets to 2 minutes. So now we're just on starboard tack. We have advantage, as indicated up here by the 10, and being green, we have the right of way. Now there's always a favored side when you start a sailboat race. And by that I mean the wind is, generally all the starts of a race are upwind. And ideally the wind should be coming in at an angle of 90 degrees to the start-finish line. That's not always the case. It usually blows on a slight angle. And this is pretty close to 90 degrees actually. But depending on how that, let me adjust my boat course and look at it again. I think it looks slightly to the right side of my boat, which means a starboard tack would be favored here because that's going to get you closer to the first mark. So those are the kinds of things you look at the start. But again, in shifty winds, that advantage can go from a starboard tack to a port tack at the start multiple times. That orange marker in the distance is pointing to the first marker. And it looks like we have to go to the right of that, past that mark to port. We got about 2 minutes to the start of the race. Looks like there's a pretty big swell out here today. So by hitting the number 0, you get in the skipper's view. You can get a God's eye view, which is pretty cool, a little disorienting. The big picture view, and then back to the original camera. So we are down to 1 minute before the start. The starting tactics are much different in match racing, where you're racing against just one other boat, than they are in fleet racing. And the most obvious difference is in fleet racing, there's lots of boats out on the course that you have to avoid. When it's match racing, it's you versus your opponent, and that's it. You only have to worry about staying out of the way of only one boat. And when you've got 20 or 30 boats, however big the fleet is, all jockeying around for position at the start, it can be a real melee at the start of a fleet race. So we got 20 seconds to the start. And we're going to come around now, get on starboard tack. And this looks like it's going to be a pretty good start on our part. Hopefully we'll be up to speed. 4, 3, 2, 1. Race has started, and we crossed early. I can't believe we did that. And now we're going to hit this boat. Oh man, are you kidding me? So we had a good start and we blew it. I didn't think we would cross the line, but maybe I was just looking at the wrong mark. So now we've got our work cut out for us. Switzerland is a slightly better boat. They got us by 12 seconds at the start. Big tactical error on my part. So we'll just do our best. We'll try to take advantage of the wind shifts quicker and hopefully inch up on our opponents. Now looking at the big picture, you can see the wind is blowing in this direction. And when a boat is upwind of another, it interferes with the wind flow to the boat that's downwind. And when you're on the same tack like that, you actually have to be probably up in this position up here because the wind kind of swirls as it comes off the sails. Now I am going to continue on this heading. I'm not going to go with them because we're the boat behind. We're going to try to get an advantage here by staying away from the other boat. In a match race, I would rather stay pretty close to the boat I'm racing. And when the shift of the wind to the left like that, we call that a lift because it brings me closer to the mark that we're sailing to. If we're headed, the wind comes around to the front and it takes us away from the mark that we're sailing to. So that was a little bit of an advantage to us compared to the boat from Switzerland. So now we're just basically sailing our own race. Another lift. More advantage to us. Now this number right here tells us we're in second position. We were 12 seconds behind at the start. You can see that big old swell rolling in. The graphics in this game are pretty cool. So I'm looking for a course to the next mark of about 200. It's about 70 degrees off of my heading, and when that happens, I should be able to tack and make it to the next mark. Wind shifts will change that, obviously, like that. We're coming about, and hopefully we'll be close to making that mark. Very close. Looks like we may need a wind shift. So we're about 4 degrees short of the 200 needed to make that mark. The current, the arrow down here in yellow, is blowing us, or pushing us, I should say, not blowing us, away from the mark. But we just got a lift. The wind shifted to the right. So now our heading is 205, and that means that we can make it to the next mark, but that will change undoubtedly before we get there. And I'm going to sail a little bit upwind of that mark, because if the wind heads us, we'll have a little bit more breathing room for making a turn to the left and still be able to make that mark. So there goes Switzerland. They're tacking now. We are on starboard. We're looking pretty good right now. We will be on starboard tack when we meet up here around the mark, which gives us the right of way. We got headed, and that's why I wanted to take advantage by going a little bit upwind of the mark. So we're still a little bit short of what we need to make that mark now by about 4 degrees. Hopefully we'll get another lift and be looking pretty good. Big old motor yacht passing by in the distance. I was just recently in the Bahamas and saw some of those ships up close and personal, and I've been watching some videos of those giant privately owned yachts that cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Pretty impressive boats, and to think that somebody has enough money to buy those for their own private boat is just incredible. So Switzerland is going to beat us to the mark, and we got headed again, so that takes us further away. You can see what I mean? It takes us further away from the mark we need to. So they're going to pass well out in front of us. Look at the size of the swells out there. You can see they were really delayed in making their tack there. One of my criticisms of this game is that AI is not the best, but that's true of probably anything where you're letting computers control things. And let's go ahead and get our spinnaker up, because by the time we get up there and round the mark, we'll be pointing in the right direction. So we lost a lot of time on that run. We were 12 seconds behind at the start. We're 28 seconds behind now. And that's the mark we're sailing to right there. They're going directly for it, so that, as of right now, that is, you know, maybe they had a wind shift up there. I was going to say that might not be the fastest point of sail for these boats, but maybe they had a different wind shift than us, because now we're heading about the same. See, they are heading right for the middle of that gate. And unfortunately, there's not a whole lot we can do about that. Again, they are a faster boat. They got a better crew, better sails. We got a slightly better hull, but they got a big lead. So they're going to have to majorly screw up for us to catch them. So basically, we're going to go through this gate here, come back to the mark we just left. After we round that mark for the second time, we go back through the gate. For a total of 2 laps, and then around the mark a third time, and then it's a sprint for the finish line. So we were 12 seconds behind at the start, 28 seconds behind now. And the wind is shifting big time there again. Not a good race for us. Trying to see if that arrow is green. and whether or not we can make the mark. So we're pointing right at it right now. Hopefully the wind doesn't shift and screw us up again. So they're rounding the mark, taking it pretty wide as AI always does. We want to get that sail down before we get there, because with the spinnaker up, you can't come back into the wind. It just kind of catches the wind, pulls the nose over, and doesn't let you get up into the wind the way you should. So let's go ahead and get that down right about now. Hopefully we'll have that down by the time we get to the mark. There it goes. And now we'll be able to round up fairly easily. And the spinnaker won't screw us up. So let's get back on that green heading. We are 28.49 seconds behind. So we held our own on the downwind version, the downwind leg. Still a pretty big deficit. I'm not optimistic we're going to be able to catch up. One of the interesting things about sailboat races, it's hard to tell who's in the lead when they're so far apart, and they're not going directly upwind. It's not on a regular race course where you can tell by where they are on the track who's ahead and who's behind. This game gives you a little cheat by this number right here. You can tell that you're in first or second in match racing. So the only way to tell whether you're ahead or behind is when you cross. And the distance between boats at the cross is how far you are behind. But when they're way over there to the side of the course and you're far apart, it's really hard to tell sometimes who's ahead and who's behind. So right now, Rule 10 applies. Starboard tack boat, which is Switzerland, has the right-of-way over the port tack boat, which is us. Doesn't matter whether you're going upwind or downwind. That rule always applies. Now they will eventually tack to get back on a port tack to come back to the mark. When they do, we'll be on the same tack, and that will switch to a 12. Boats on the same tack, and one will be ahead, one will be behind. If there's overlap, so if I look at my boat from the side here and they overlap my boat, then different rules apply. Rule 13 applies. So right now my heading is 273. I'm going to subtract 70 from that to get 203. When this CNM, course to the next mark, gets down to 203, that'll be pretty close to the time to tack. And we tacked a little bit early. We had to tack twice, in other words, by tacking early. So I may give myself a little extra cushion. So now that's down to actually 196. I may wait till it's down to 190 before I tack, just to give myself a little extra breathing room so I don't have to make an extra tack at the mark. 193, maybe I'll get down to 185. There we go, let's tack. And you can see how far ahead the boat from Switzerland is. We got a little bit of breathing room, so we can sail more directly to the mark now. We can be headed a little bit and still make the mark. So that number went down to 0. They've rounded the mark. We'll see how far we are behind. Let's get the crew ready to hoist our spinnaker. Let's have them go up now. We'll round the mark, and by the time we get around, pointing in the right direction, the sail will be up. So we lost some ground there. We're 34 seconds behind now. They're just a better boat. Probably better skipper too. Now when you're going downwind, this is a good time to try to blanket your opponent. Your mainsail is a huge sail, the spinnaker is a huge sail, and that creates a huge wind pocket out in this area here, where the wind sails into your sails and it gets turbulent and swirls around. And if you can get your opponent in that position, their wind is not clean, it's disrupted, and you can block the wind to their sails and take advantage of that. So when you're behind, you try to use that to catch back up with the boat that's ahead. And I think it's depending on the strength of the wind. If it's light wind, that shadow is fairly large, and I want to say it's something like 3 or 4 sail width, so it's actually pretty good. You saw that dark water kind of spread out there in all directions. We call that a downburst or a puff. It changes the wind direction in all directions. So it's not just a wind shift all in one direction. It goes out in all different directions, like when you drop water on the floor, how the splash goes in all directions. That's what a downdraft puff is. But anyways, that wind shadow, depending on the strength of the wind, the stronger the wind, the smaller the shadow, because it just kind of forms around the boat. But for light wind, it may go way out here, where the shadow takes effect, and for stronger winds it may be in closer. So the closer you are to the boat, the more your wind shadow affects your opponent. So they're waiting till they round the mark, which is a flaw in AI, before they drop their spinnaker. That wastes time. They sail away from the mark before they can turn upwind. Let's get our sail down early, and I'll show you what I mean. Their sail didn't come down till they were way over here. And by dropping our spinnaker early, we can actually round the mark very efficiently and hopefully pick up a little bit of time. And we cut the time down to 22 seconds. So one more trip down around that mark, and then it'll be a race to the finish. So that was a pretty good leg for us, but they are a quicker boat going upwind. So now Rule 12 applies. We're both on the same tack. We're both on port tacks. Wrong way, skipper. We're both on port tacks. Rule 12 says, same tack. The boat ahead has the right of way. And they are clearly ahead of us. Now that's going to change up here to Rule 10 because they just tacked. And Rule 15 says that while you're tacking and you gain the advantage, which they did because they're on starboard tack, you have to allow the other boat time and distance to avoid running into you. So 15 applies when they're in their tack. Once they're established on a close-hauled course, which they are, now it's Rule 10, and that simply says that starboard has right away over port. Now obviously you lose speed when you tack. Your boat's going directly into the wind, you're not producing power from the sails. The fewer times you have to tack means you lose less speed, less time. So I'm going to try a little bit of a risky maneuver here and sail out and try to do this in one tack. Now they're going to have to sail or tack from starboard to port to come back to the mark and then tack again to get around the mark. If I can just do that in one tack, we'll pick up a little bit more distance on them. We just got a nice little header as well, bringing me closer to the mark. So that means when this number gets down to 200, but with wind shifts and whatnot, I'm going to give myself just a little bit of a buffer. Maybe wait till that gets down to 190 and see if we can make it in one tack. Comes a helicopter overhead. They must be filming this race for a race TV or something. Yachting TV. Making a documentary, who knows. So we'll be famous because we are behind. Okay, 197, about 6 more degrees, and I'm going to tack again. I think the wind shifts lately have been lifts to the, in other words, shifting to the left, and I think it may mean, to average things out, it may shift more to the right. So let's tack now. Let's see if we can pull this off. Anyways, the wind shifts may be more to the right, which will again be in our favor. When you are on a close-hauled course like this, the sails are pulled in absolutely tight. They make this venturi slot right here, which actually pulls the mainsail forward. People think it's just from being pushed on by the side, but that's not true. This sail pattern creates a venturi effect. And if you remember your high school physics, when that area that the wind goes through narrows, it accelerates, and that creates low pressure. Low pressure will not only accelerate the air, but it also pulls the mainsail right here forward as much as it's being pushed on, maybe even more, from this side. So we got headed again. We're 10 degrees off. Yeah, oh boy, look at that. Switzerland is way ahead of us, so this boat does not go well upwind. Plus, I'm probably not the best skipper either, but whatever. So remember that, we were 22 seconds behind. Got a nice header there, that helps a lot. Let's see how far we are behind, but this is just now a sprint to the finish. over here. So once we make that mark, there's no more maneuvering to be done. Rule 12 applies. Opposite tack. We're on starboard, they're on port. We have right away. Actually, they look like they're on starboard too. So it's just boat ahead, same attack. So my mistake. Rule 12, same tack. All right, let's hoist our sail. Might have been a little bit too early. "51 seconds behind." Man, we got crushed on that one. We lost 30 seconds. You can see this dark shadow moving over the water. I believe that is how the game represents wind shifts. And you can actually see those on the water when you're sailing a railboat. Call them cat's paws or whatever. It does change the color of the water. Let's see if the wind shifts as that reaches us. And sure enough, it's bobbling a little bit. Not by much. Let's jibe. I think we can just sail right to the mark now, right to the finish line. But we're going to lose this round to a superior boat. The good news is, you know, we sailed the first round against Italy, which has the same score as Switzerland. They both had a score of 18 sails on their ranking list. And we beat them. And the reason we beat Italy, I think, is because we controlled the start. We beat them across the finish line. We were able to dictate the tactics of the race. And because, I'll have to look at the replay. They said I was over the line early. I had to restart. And in match racing, restart just means you have to dip down below the start line and then restart the race. If this was a fleet race, you actually have to sail around one of the marks, either the buoy over here or the committee buoy. If you're over here and you restart early, you have to go all the way around and restart the race. And in match racing, because you're only sailing one boat, race is over. So they just say you have to dip below that line, get completely across the start-finish line, and then restart the race. So anyways, we had to restart the race. We lost 12 seconds to Switzerland. And once they were ahead with the superior boat, it was no contest, and they kicked our butt today. So we'll see how far we are behind. We held our own on the spinnaker run. Again, our spinnaker was not as good as Switzerland's, but our hull speed was good. But we held our own on the spinnaker run. We just could not keep up going up against the wind. So that's it. We finished 40-some seconds, 47 seconds behind, something like that. So Switzerland wins. So here's the results of round 2. Brazil beats China. That was expected. Those are two bottom of the tier boats. The United States finally gets a win. They beat Japan. That is the best boat versus the worst boat. Germany beat Spain. And those were two evenly matched boats. They're both ranked at 17, so that's a big loss for Spain. France beats Australia. And France is probably ranked number 5, and Australia ranked number 12, or number 10. So not an upset there. Switzerland beats Great Britain. Not an upset there. We didn't sail a good race. And Italy beats New Zealand. Those are the second and third ranked boats in the fleet. They both have 18 points. In fact, their matchups are identical. So that was a big win for Italy. So after 2 races, Brazil, Germany, and France are undefeated, and they have 4 points. United States, Switzerland, Spain, Italy, and Great Britain and Australia all have a win and a loss at 2 points. And in the bottom 3 boats, New Zealand, Japan, and China are still waiting for their first victory. Now, ironically, New Zealand is, like I said, one of the second-ranked boats. So they're off to a terrible start. So that's it for round 2. Hope you enjoyed the race, and we'll see you next time. So I went back and reviewed the race, and I think I was certainly across the start line early. That put us behind immediately by 12 seconds. And when a superior boat and crew gets a lead in sailboat racing, it's really hard for the other boat to make up any time. So if they do everything right, they should win the race easily. So what I was anticipating or hoping for was for the Swiss boat to make some mistakes, which I know AI is going to do, and then try to take advantage of it. The other thing I realized after watching the race, something I need to pay more attention to, is the direction of the wind and the course to the first mark from the start-finish line. I think throughout the race, one tack was favored over the other, and the reason I fell so far behind on the second leg going out to the distant mark was because starboard tack was much closer to the mark than port tack. I sailed further away from the mark than the Swiss boat did. So they went from a 24-second lead out to I think a 40-something second lead. And that's because I wasn't paying attention to the wind direction. So I'm going to have to pay more attention to that, figure out the math to tell me what tack I should be on. I tried to just stay on one tack fewer times, but if you're sailing a longer distance, that strategy doesn't work. So in reality, it was bad skippering, bad awareness that caused us to lose that race. And hats off to the Swiss boat. They were better than us, and they beat us pretty soundly. So I made a real quick diagram to explain how the favored tack works. In this diagram here, you can see that the wind is blowing perpendicular to the start-finish line, and you can only sail between about 30 and 40 degrees off the wind. No closer than that, otherwise the boat just loses speed. And when the wind is perpendicular to the start-finish line, there is no favored tack. Each one will get you close to the buoy for the first mark. Now, if the wind shifts to the right, you can still only sail about 30 to 40 degrees off the wind. So if the wind shifts to the right, you can see that the starboard tack will take you right to the mark, whereas the port tack takes you further away from the mark and you have to sail a lot further. So it's obviously to your advantage to be on the starboard tack when the wind shifts to the right. And just the opposite is true when the wind shifts to the left. The port tack, in this case, will take you right to the mark, and you do not want to be on the starboard tack. And when it's not quite so extreme, maybe the advantage won't be as obvious, but there will still be an advantage to one tack or the other, and that's where I lost ground in this race on the upwind legs. I wasn't paying attention to the wind angle relative to the perpendicular course to the start-finish line, and there was definitely a favored tack, and I missed it and lost out and lost some time to the Swiss boat. So I just wanted to make that quick diagram to show you how that works.